Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Reading from Purification of the Heart, translation and commentary of Imam al-Mawlud's Matharat al Qulub by Hamza Yusuf. Continuing from in the introduction from the poem verses 9 to 15. After firmly grasping this foundation, then mastering the heart's infirmities is the second stage. Knowledge of the heart's ailments, what causes each of them and what removes them, is an obligation on everyone. This is the ruling of Al-Ghazali. However, this does not apply to one who was already granted a sound heart. As scholars other than Al-Ghazali opine, for Al-Ghazali reckoned the heart's illnesses as inherent to humanity. Others deemed them predominant in man, not qualities necessarily inherent to his nature. But know that obliteration of these diseases until no trace remains is beyond the capacity of human beings. Nonetheless, here I give you what you need to know of their definitions, etiologies, and cures. The purification process. Purifying the heart is a process. First, one must understand the necessity of having courtesy with God and the importance of fulfilling its requirements, as noted above. Second, one must be aware of the diseases of the heart, aware of their existence, their ailments, and the deleterious complications and troubles that ensue from them, and recognize that these diseases prevent one from attaining the courtesy. Knowledge of the diseases of the heart, their causes, and how to remove them is an obligation on every sane adult human being. Imam Mawlud cites Imam al-Ghazali, an 11th century master scholar of the science of purification, holding the position that it is indeed an obligation on everyone to learn about the ailments of the heart and their cures. Imam Mawlud then states that some scholars hold that this is not an obligation per se for everyone, particularly for a person who has already been blessed with a sound heart and has been spared these maladies. Imam al-Ghazali dissents and says that these diseases are inherent to the human condition. One can observe, for example, greed, jealousy, hatred, and the like in children, though the diseases do not necessarily endure. But how does this compare with original sin, the Christian concept which states that people are corrupt by nature? In short, though Muslim scholars of the caliber of Imam al-Ghazali do say that diseases of the heart are related to human nature, they would also say that this manifests itself as human inclination. However, Muslims do not believe that this inclination is the result of Adam's wrongdoing, or that Adam ﷺ brought upon himself and transferred to his descendants a permanent state of sin that can only be lifted by sacrificial blood. Adam and Eve erred, no doubt, but they then turned in penitence to God, and God accepted their repentance and forgave them both. This is the nature of God's forgiveness. There is no blemish passed on to his progeny. The Quran declares, "No soul bears the burden of sin of another soul." Quran Surah 6, Ayah 164. However, this fact does not negate the existence of base instincts among humans. This matter relates to the fact that the heart is a spiritual organ. The unseen aspect of the heart contains a bad seed that has the potential of becoming like a cancer that can metastasize and overtake the heart. The bacterium responsible for tuberculosis, for example, lives latent in the lungs of millions of people. When its carriers age or succumb to another disease that weakens their immune system, tuberculosis may start to emerge. This analogy illustrates that there is a dominant element in the human heart that, if nurtured and allowed to grow, can damage the soul and eventually destroy it. The Prophet ﷺ said, "If the son of Adam sins, a black spot appears in the heart, and if the person repents, it is erased. But if he does not, it continues to grow until the whole heart becomes pitch black." Incidentally, this notion of associating the color black with sin is not racist in its origins. The attribution has been long used even among black Africans who refer to a person who is wretched as black-hearted. The Quran says about successful people on the Day of Judgment that their faces become white. Surah 3, Ayat 106. This does not mean white as a hue of skin. Rather, it refers to light and brightness, which are spiritual descriptions not associated with any color. A black person can have spiritual light in his face, and a white person can have darkness, and vice versa, depending on one's spiritual and moral condition. Imam Ghazali considers ailments of the heart to be part of the Adamic potential. He believes one is obliged to know this about human nature in order to be protected. Other scholars simply consider these ailments to be predominant in man. That is, most people have these qualities, but not necessarily everybody. It is interesting that Imam Mawlud says it is impossible to rid oneself of these diseases completely. This implies that purification is a lifelong process, not something that is applied once and then forgotten. Purity of heart never survives a passive relationship. One must always guard his or her heart. There is a well-known hadith which states that every child is born in a state of fitra. Many Muslims translate this into English as every child is born a Muslim. However, the hadith says fitra, which means that people are inclined to faith, with an intuitive awareness of divine purpose and a nature built to receive the prophetic message. What remains then is to nurture one's fitra and cultivate this inclination to faith and purity of heart.